I'm at Fort Canning. Now this place used to be the military base for British and Japanese forces during World War II. I'm here to participate in the Battle Box guided tour. So let's go in and learn more about why Winston Churchill called this site the worst disaster in British military history. In the early 1800s, the British ended up colonizing the Malaysian peninsula, including Singapore, because this region of the Southeast Asia was known for being rich in tin, rubber, and oil, which the British Empire needed. Now, during World War II, Fort Canning was the military base for the British forces. Now, the Japanese also realized that this area was rich in natural resources, including oil, which they needed to fund their war effort. But before attacking here, the Japanese needed to take care of naval forces located around here. So the American naval base in Pearl Harbor was a threat, and which we all know, which was attacked in 1941. And the British Royal Navy, which actually only consisted of two ships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Repulse. So after taking care of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese easily took care of just these two British warships. And so now the Japanese Navy had full control over the waters. As far as air power was concerned, the Japanese planes were more technologically advanced and modern compared to the British planes that were stationed here. About half of the British planes were destroyed within the first week of fighting. So the British actually pulled their planes back into airfields outside of the Malaysian peninsula, and that essentially left this area undefended, and the Japanese forces quickly took command of the air and the sea. Now, as far as the ground fighting was concerned, the British forces actually had more men than the Japanese. But the problem was that the Japanese were actually moving extremely quickly throughout the Malaysian peninsula from north to south. The Japanese forces were actually equipped with light tanks, mobile artillery units, and infantry on bicycles, which made them incredibly efficient and incredibly fast. And because the Japanese infantry were on bicycles, the rubber would wear off very easily. And so it would just be the metal rim rolling on gravel roads. That actually made it seem as if the Japanese had more tanks than they actually did because of the sound of the metal rubbing against the gravel. In contrast, the British forces actually had no tanks because the higher-ups decided that this area that they would be fighting in would actually be consisting more of jungle terrain, and so tanks would essentially be useless there. But unfortunately, that was not the case. So the Japanese forces had 240 tanks, while the British forces had none. So the Japanese forces ripped through this area so quickly, and within about 55 days, they had crossed the Straits of Johor into Singapore. So Singapore was kind of like their final defense. So the British forces had retreated all the way down to Singapore. British General Percival was actually the commanding officer here, and he decided to station the majority of his units on the northeastern side, thinking that the Japanese would be attacking from there. And there was only two Australian divisions that was defending the northwestern side. A lot of the guns and the artillery units were pointed towards the south because the thought was that the Japanese Navy would come in from the south and attack from there. Unfortunately, he was very wrong. So the Japanese actually set a diversion force that would attack from the northeast, but the main bulk of the Japanese divisions would attack from the northwest, where just the Australian divisions were. And that proved to be devastating. The Japanese forces just ripped through that area and essentially just kept pushing the British forces back to this hill, which is the place of Battle Box. And on February 15th, 1942, General Percival, along with 11 of his senior commanding officers, made the toughest decision ever to surrender Singapore. All the civilians, all the officers and men here were essentially taken as prisoners of war by the Japanese. At the time of the surrender, the British still had about 120,000 troops here, of course with about 1 million or so civilians as well. And so this decision to surrender had far-reaching consequences. All of these people were taken into Japanese prisoner of war camps, and it was a very sad day for British military history and a devastating day for Singaporeans as well, that would have far-reaching consequences that are still seen today.